Right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Sustainable Transport Task Force. So it's the inaugural meeting of the task force. So thank you very much for giving up your time this evening to consider a sort of really important agenda item for the council and its partners, stakeholders, residents, and communities. So I will bring up an agenda item. I'll swap that over from my colleague Lynn. Bear with me 1 second. So hopefully, colleagues, you'll just see that if my colleague Lynn or Christy can just confirm that that's visible.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So the welcome from myself, and I do really appreciate your time that you're giving up for us this afternoon. I'll quickly go on to just some housekeeping matters, if possible, please. So those of you who are used to using sort of Microsoft Teams or sorts of experience that before, we will ask for cameras to be turned off until you're sort of invited or wish to raise an issue as part of the members of the task force, and it's often just good practice to mute the microphones, please. Just helps with removing any feedback on the line. So we'll go on to item 2. So apologies for absence. I think I've noted 1 or 2 apologies that have been received this afternoon. Apologies from Kathy McGee from the Youth Senate, and then we had apologies from Mike Hogg, but there's a substitute attendee for Mike Hogg, and that's Vanessa Bond. So welcome along, Vanessa, to the task force. And then I think we had apologies from Peter Bulmer as well, but pleased to hear that I think we had a substitute, which was John Salt. So again, welcome along this evening.
We've just had a message in the chat just to ask if your microphone could be moved a little bit further from your head, because I think there's a little bit of interference maybe.
Okay, thank you.
That sounds better.
Is that better? Thank you.
It's for me, yeah.
Yeah. So they're the apologies that I've got. I'll just check with Christy and my colleagues Lynn.
I agree with your list. I will double check as you go along and let you know.
Yeah, thank you. So by way of item 3, then, in terms of introductions, I'll start with myself, and I'll just invite members of the task force to do a make themselves aware to the meeting, and just do a quick background to who they are, and sort of what their role and interest in the task force is. If I can, I'll do a round table of that and I'll invite you in. So starting with myself, I'm Sean Trainer. I'm Head of Highways and Transport at Cheshire West and Chester Council. I'm acting just in terms of secretariat for the task force. It is independent, and the council are just facilitating the meeting here. I've got some colleagues along with me in the secretariat as well who are helping facilitate the session. So I'll just do those briefly. So Christy Littler.
Hello, yes. Do you want me to say who I am? And
please.
Transport manager working in transport and infrastructure in Sean's team. Obviously overseeing some of the work on the active travel and emergency active travel lane work at the moment.
Thank you, Christy. And I've got Lynn Mackay alongside me, who works in the strategic transport team.
Sorry, yes, I was on mute there. Hi, it's Lynn Mackay, strategic
transport team. I'm team leader. I'm involved in local bus infrastructure and concessionary travel.
Thanks, Lynn. And then we've also got Stephanie Ward, who's helping facilitate the Teams meeting as well, if Steph wants to make herself.
Hi there, my name's Stephanie Ward, and I manage the concessionary travel team. We produce concessionary bus passes for Cheshire West and Chester, Halton and Warrington Borough Councils.
Thanks, Steph. So I'll just move my screen down 1 second on the agenda, and I'm just going to invite the task force members to come in, introduce themselves, and by way of a brief background, as I said. So if I can first off just go down the list here. So Professor Garfield Southall.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Sean. My name is Garfield Southall, and I am Professor Emeritus at the University of Chester. I have recently retired from the post of Dean of Science and Engineering, so I can have more time to devote myself to tasks like this. I'm a keen outdoor person, keen runner, but I've also had a long-standing interest in all matters transport. I chair the local Community Rail Partnership, and yesterday I was just voted onto the board of the National Community Rail Network. So you can see from that I have a keen interest in all matters to do with both sustainability and transport. So thank you.
Thank you, Garfield. And then we got Tamara Hunt along with us this evening.
Apologies, I'd muted Tamara. Apologies, you should be unmuted now. Sorry.
Tamara Hunt. I'm the Sustainability Officer at the University of Chester.
Thanks, Tamara. Good evening. And we've got Nicola from Marketing Cheshire.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nicola Said. I'm Commercial Director for Marketing Cheshire. Marketing Cheshire is the tourism board at DMO for Chester and Cheshire, and we're also part of the Cheshire Warrington LEP. So our role is to focus on promoting Cheshire Warrington as a place to live, work, invest and visit. So really interested in the sustainable infrastructure as part of that whole agenda.
Thank you, Nicola. Now we've got Paul Morrison.
Hello everyone, Paul Morrison. I'm the head of delivery for the North of England, representing the charity Sustrans, which is the national walking and cycling charity. So obviously we've got a vested interest in all things active travel, and I think my primary interest in this task force is the community engagement elements of how you kind of present schemes and how you get community buy-in through engagement rather than consultation.
Thanks, Paul. Welcome along. And then we've got Carol.
Hello.
Carol,
hi, my name is Carol Vella. I'm the Business Development and Stakeholder Manager with the West Cheshire and North Wales Chamber of Commerce. So we represent just under 600 businesses across both areas, and obviously we have a vested interest in helping and supporting, but also understanding the sustainable transport agenda. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Carol. And then we've got, it was going to be Mike, I think, for Chester Residents Association Group, but welcome Vanessa, Vanessa Bond.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, yeah, thank you.
Hi. Evening, everyone. My name is Vanessa Bond. I'm Secretary of Chester Residents Associations Group. We formed last year and essentially we're 24 residents associations, primarily within, but also nearby the city walls. So extending to sort of Westminster Park, Queen's Park, Hull, Hanbridge, etc. We decided on 5 sort of key topics that are of concern to most of the residents that we represent, and transport and traffic management was one of them. And we now see the sort of the active travel and sort of seeing the plus side of COVID. Hopefully it will be an accelerant to sort of improvements. And for myself, having lived and worked, although I was born in Chester, having lived and worked in Manchester and London for all of my professional working life until I retired recently, then, you know, it's sort of, yeah, if we could have some of that in Chester, that would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, Great, thanks Vanessa. And then we've got David Whitehead.
Hi there, I'm Dave Whitehead. I'm the chair of Huntington Parish Council. I'm clearly just here to represent the views of Huntington residents as part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And then we've got Rob Pickering.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Rob Pickering. I'm the lead cycling delivery manager for the North of England for British Cycling. So British Cycling's the national governing body for all forms of cycling in this country. Our aim is to get more people cycling more often. It's as simple as that. I have a quite considerable experience of working with local authorities and a wide range of stakeholders to achieve our aim. And I'd like to do that with Cheshire West and Chester and other stakeholders here. And as a resident of Chester, I have a vested interest and I'm particularly keen to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, great to have you along. Thanks, Rob. And then hopefully Steve Hughes. Steve been able to join us. Can't hear Steve.
Yep. Microphone muted. Apologies. Don't know if you.
Yeah.
There you go, Steve. Apologies.
No problem, Christy, sorry. Yes, so my name's Stephen Hughes and I'm chair of the Chester Sustainability Forum. And as well as that, I was involved in the hack, in the consultation that went on with GFN prior to the installation of the sustainable transport lanes. And yeah, so I guess those are my two involvements in everything up to date.
Thank you, Steve. And then we would normally have, and I'm sure a future session, Kathy McGee and representatives of the Youth Senate. I know the intention was to bring along a couple of members of the Youth Senate. I know they do struggle for time a little bit with being students and sort of so we'll try and design it around their availability as well. Such like evening sessions like this. Shame they've not been able to join us this time, but I'm sure they will at a future session. And we'll share the details of the meeting today with them. And the next I've got Roy Newton.
Thanks, Sean.
Good evening.
Can you hear me?
We can,
yeah. Yeah, I'm usually very good at talking whilst muted on these things. So, hello everybody. I'm Roy Newton from the Cheshire and Warrington Local Enterprise Partnership. The LEP is particularly keen on economic growth, but in particular sustainable economic growth. So one of the key things we want to be doing is focusing on transport, and my role and remit is particularly focused on both transport and infrastructure. And therefore my main interest here, well, there's two interests. One is how we can actually get more sustainable transport and get more usage of sustainable transport, but also that whole part about stakeholder engagement rather than consultation.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. It's welcome, thank you. And then we've got Stephen Perry along. Good morning, Steve. Good afternoon, Steve.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes, good. Steve Perry, good evening, everyone. I live in Saul, just north of Chester, for those that don't know it. And I'm tonight representing the Cheshire West and Chester Active Travel Forum. This forum was set up about 2 years ago, initially by Louise Gittins and now chaired by Karen Shaw. It includes interested parties, partners, local councillors and council officers. And amongst many other things, we've had a very active role in helping to create the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan that was approved by the council earlier this year in the middle of the summer. I'm also a keen cyclist myself and an active walker. I'm also very active in the Chester Cycling Campaign. I'm a member of the Cycling UK and a member and a regular volunteer with Sustrans. So hopefully I represent all aspects of active travel, but with a particular bias and interest of cycling. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And then we've got Bernadette Bailey along.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here to represent NHS Cheshire's Clinical Commissioning Group. That's the organisation responsible for commissioning all health care for Cheshire residents, obviously Cheshire West and Chester within that. My role within the Clinical Commissioning Group is programme lead for a section of work that's called Living Well for Longer, and within that responsibility comes helping the NHS locally move on its climate change agenda. So transport's interesting because of the sustainability aspect, but also about the right options and right connections for people to access where appropriate their health appointments and facilities, particularly probably GP practices, but also hospitals. So that's my interest.
Thank you, Bernadette. Thank you. And then David Beer.
Good evening, everyone. I'm David Beer. I'm a senior manager with Transport Focus. We're the national watchdog, and we have a formal remit to represent and promote the interests of transport users across Britain. My own role, I coordinate our work across the bus and tram industries in England. I'm a member of the Network Rail Route Supervisory Board for Wales, and I'm also currently chairing the advisory panel for Transport for Wales.
Thank you, David. And then we've got Claire Roberts.
Hi, yeah, I'm Claire Roberts, and I coordinate the West Cheshire Poverty Truth Commission. I actually work for Cheshire West and Chester Council, and the Poverty Truth Commission helps people with a lived experience of poverty to have a voice and to be able to influence change. So I'm here from that perspective this evening, and I'm also a resident within Cheshire West.
Thanks, Claire. And then we've got Andy Farrell.
Hi, Andy Farrell, board member and therefore representing the Chester City Centre Business Improvement District, representing 464 premises within the town centre in the hospitality and retail sectors in the main. Therefore, really interested in this task force, particularly interested in obviously city centre vitality and viability, its enhancement as a destination and continued investment within it. Just to help people who don't know me, until recently I was executive director at Warrington Council, previous to that Chester, and just finished short stints with the Local Enterprise Partnership and Marketing Cheshire. That's me. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Andy. And then we've got Mike Garrett. Is Mike with us, Christy?
I've got a mic as a guest, which I've just unmuted, so I'm hoping that's Mike.
Yeah.
Okay. Now can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Okay, hi. I'm Mike Garrett. I'm chairman of a freight consultancy in Chester, which covers all modes of transport, covers everything from global maritime services to urban freight distribution, on which subject we actually did a policy study for the European Commission. So I'm here to bring a little bit of balance, I guess. Everyone has to have their goods delivered to them, right, as well as move around as passengers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Good to have you along. And we've got Kathy Partington.
That could be down to me again. Bear with me a second.
Yeah, that's okay, Chris. I don't want
to. It's okay now.
Thank you. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I'm the Facilities and Development Director for Chester Zoo, responsible for all development work within the zoo. So keen to develop and support improvements of sustainable means of transport to and from the zoo for our staff and circa 2 million visitors each year coming into Chester.
Thanks, Kathy. And we've got John Salt representing Great Boughton Parish Council. John, welcome.
Yeah, hello, I'm standing in for Peter Bulmer, John Salt, but I chair as a councillor, I chair the transport group of particular interest. But I bring with me, I'm the operations, I was the operations manager for Cheshire West for the fire service. I currently risk assess for them after retirement, risk assess operationally for the fire service, and I'm a past member of the LSP and a past area partnership board chair. So I have a little bit of knowledge in those areas, if you want to call on it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. So just again, a further thank you. I'm really looking forward to some fantastic contributions there from the task force members. A significant and wide range of expertise across sectors and interests, but also down to some of the sorts of local representations of residents groups and parish councils. So I think it's a really exciting task force to be involved with, as it sort of embarks on its important contributions going forward. So thank you once again. I will just go round to any declarations of interest on item 4. I've not been made aware of any, and I probably don't envisage any at this point on the first meeting. So, Christy, unless advised otherwise, I'll move on to. No. Yeah, thanks, Christy. I'll move on to the appointment of the chair, and really spoiled for choice from that list. It's fair to say, and the list of the members that have been involved have sort of exceeded certainly my expectation, and the enthusiasm when I approached you fellow members was really pleasing to see. I think you've grasped the importance of the matter, not only for Cheshire West and Chester, but I really do think the task force could give some really useful insight regionally and nationally. I've certainly made the Department for Transport aware of the initiatives that the council are embarking upon here, and they're very keen to have an overview of the process that we're undertaking. It's not something that they've heard of across the country in response to some of the challenges that we're facing. So, spoke for choice, and what we've looked to do there is nominate Professor Garfield Southall as the proposed chair for the task force. I think we'll go on to some of the background to the task force in a short while when I do my introduction. But certainly it's very much it's not a council task force. I am just facilitating the meeting this evening, and we are looking for independence across the membership, and we certainly thought that Professor Southall was well placed. So I hope the task force members endorse that proposal for Garfield to take that role forward, and I'm sure he'll do it successfully with support from the fellow members.
It's agreed from me.
Thank you. Appreciate the support there. If there are any issues or queries in terms of that, then please do indicate or let us know, and we can resolve those. So if there isn't, welcome Garfield to the role of the chair. And I know when we spoke in the introduction to the task force, I could sense, like the other members, your enthusiasm and your desire to do a good job here to help us with the challenges we face. So,
okay. Well, thank you very much, Sean, and thank you everybody for your support. I will do everything I can to make sure this is a success and we deliver the right outcomes from this. As Sean said, I am completely neutral on this, and I'm really looking forward to some interesting discussion and working our way through this. So, thank you.
Thank you, Garfield.
Sure. Sorry to interrupt. Just to advise that there's been a number of people backing you on the chair in the chat. So I'll make a note of those. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, we'll appreciate that support once again. So I'll go on to to the next item, which is 6 here, and just a bit of background, and I won't particularly dwell too much in this area, and just for the people, the attendees who are listening in here, and just reassure that this content will be made available and published in the next few days. So I think I'm really keen to look at the big pictures, the background, about the background to the formation of the task force. So in 2019, the council voted unanimously to declare a climate emergency. It's actually the 4th highest emitting of all local authorities in the country. So an incredible challenge and a responsibility for us to address, but also on the flip side of that coin, a great opportunity for us to be successful in that challenge and make significant contributions to that, and that's very much of the role that I see of the task force. So, in declaring that climate emergency, our Chief Executive Andrew Lewis was directed to produce a report to demonstrate how we would achieve that challenging target. So this was produced in and presented to council at the beginning of this year, and it really did set out the scale of achieving that carbon neutrality by 2045 and the type of interventions that would be required. So when we say that we're the 4th highest emitting of all local authorities, transport is actually the 2nd highest emitting sector locally, only surpassed by some sort of dense industry, particularly around the Ellesmere Port area. And a sort of a report from Anthesis, experts in that field of climate emergency and carbon reduction, set out the significant changes in the way that we travel will need to occur in order to achieve carbon neutrality. So transport very much underpins our ambitions in this area. So I just want to touch on a few points here, and again, this just further emphasises the challenge that faces, and we do acknowledge these statistics and current modal share. So 74% of employed residents travel to work by car. So a high percentage of residents do that commute by car currently, with 15% of residents commuting out of the Cheshire West and Chester region, which means there's a large percentage who commute internally. So 40% of households own more than one car, and within the Chester urban area, fewer than 10% of journeys to work were undertaken on public transport. So some relatively low baseline in terms of that public transport use, but clearly high levels of car dependency and ownership. So the extent of change required is therefore stark from that baseline position, and it does require a fundamental change in the way we live and move in the borough. So Anthesis set out a number of targets for us to achieve that overall objective, in so much as the contribution that transport makes. So by 2025, so not that far away now, a 17% reduction in total travel demand will be required. So again, the digital agenda, and we're clearly experiencing during the current pandemic some of that travel reduction, clearly, with the amount of us who are working from home for this period. But again, that level's got to be sustained to make its contribution to the agenda, but also alongside a 25% reduction in car travel. So again, a hugely challenging target there to achieve. And then by 2050, to achieve our future targets over that time period, that 25% goes up to 38% reduction in car travel. So again, travel is required, and we acknowledge that that's still going to be the case. Then there's got to be a substantial carbon benefit derived from using public transport as well. So And when we look at the mode share of public transport, would need to increase from that low base of 10% to 18% by 2025. And then again, almost a threefold increase there of 29% by 2050. And then it's not only increasing the mode share to non-car uses and towards public transport, but the public transport itself has got to be low carbon, so either via electrification or the use of hydrogen fuel. So again, some challenges there in terms of 100% low carbon rail and 51% low carbon buses by 2025. And I know the industries have got plans themselves pursuant to those agendas. And then again, we recognise there is a place for car travel, undoubtedly, and that's not the agenda here. And it's so these cars again would need to be low or zero emission, with a transition to 100% electric or hydrogen vehicles by 2050. So that's, we'll get onto some more localised matters, and rightly so, because we really do acknowledge that some of the actions that we've taken in recent months have caused genuine concern to residents individually, to communities, and I do want to address that as part of the session here and devote time to those issues. But I think that the task force remit is very much broader than the two schemes that we'll go on to talk about in some detail. So in future sessions of the task force, we will continue to set the expectations that the task force remit is borough-wide, but it's also looking across the transport agenda, and sort of understanding, investigating how those transport changes can influence positively other agendas, from health and well-being to air quality improvement through to economic growth, prosperity. So I just wanted to set the scene that the task force remit, and clearly given the high quality of the members that we've been able to secure as part of the task force, it's really important that we do recognise that at this stage. So when we go on to some of the more local and recent schemes that the council have introduced, and controversially, then the projects that we have introduced recently have been informed by the government's vision for increasing levels of walking and cycling, as set out in the government's gear change strategy published at the end of July. So again, it very much alignment here with our own climate emergency declaration, and that it recognises there's got to be a step change in cycling and walking in the coming years, which is considered necessary to help address some of the most challenging issues that as a society we face. So I've touched on some of those previously, which are improving air quality, combating climate change, improving health and well-being, addressing inequalities, and tackling traffic congestion. Apologies. There's also a particular emphasis placed on the need to increase health benefits from more physical activity and the long-term benefits of this to the NHS. And there's also a very clear message from government that the response to the pandemic does actually represent a once-in-a-generation change to accelerate active travel. I think we can all look back not too long ago to the first lockdown, when we were hanging on to those 1 hour a day periods where we were able to go out and exercise, and the levels of cycling and walking that we saw and experienced positively in that time has given an opportunity for sort of behaviour change as well here, and I genuinely for a generation here, I think this is the opportunity to consider whether we can influence the agenda positively. Again, just recognising that the government is also developing a transport decarbonisation plan during 2020, where public transport and active travel will be the natural first choice for our daily activities. So that is the ambition. Very much correlates with our own climate declaration as well here. So I don't know, Christy, if there's any comments or observations that you want me to bring in there.
We have a hands up from a spectator. I'm not sure if you want to take that question or not, from a Councillor Margaret Parker.
Yes, Councillor Parker.
I'll need to unmute you, sorry.
Yeah.
Bear with me 1 second. Ooh. There you go.
Right. Oh, thank you, Sean. Could I just ask, is this meeting being webcast?
No, it's being recorded now, and we'll be.
It's not being webcast. Can I ask why it isn't being webcast?
Because I think there's another meeting tonight. I think that's being webcast by the authority.
So we're not able to do two at a time.
I don't think logistically we could this evening, unfortunately.
Okay.
But
could I ask that perhaps in the future it could be webcast, please?
Yeah, I'll certainly note that request, Councillor. Yeah, we'll do our best to do that for you. Yeah.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
No problem. So that was again a bit of context. I'd welcome any thoughts from task force members there on that scene setting. Really, my primary purpose here is that we'll go on to talk in some detail about some of the level of opposition to particular initiatives that we've introduced under the Emergency Active Travel Fund Tranche 1. I haven't seen, and I'm not sort of recognising that there's disagreement with the principle of the ambition of securing modal shift to benefit the areas that we've outlined there. Again, so that are well versed in the presentation there. So I think where I'm coming from with the task force and the remit via you, Chair, is that it's really, there's a collective ambition to do to achieve this goal, and I think the real primary ask of the task force, from my perspective, is to determine how we can positively secure local buy-in and support, proactive support to the initiatives that we take forward in the future. So it's very much the challenge of that this is what the ambition is. There's collective agreement to the ambition and the outcome. It's how we get there, and very much in sort of co-production with our communities and stakeholders.
Sean, we've got a couple of hands up. Andy Farrell, Rob Pickering, and then Roy Newton. Yeah.
Andy, yeah, I'll come in.
Hi, Sean. Agree with kind of particularly the point you make in terms of now's the time for transformation, and I totally agree with you there. There's a real opportunity, both in terms of what we should do, but I think Chester's in a different place than perhaps where it's been previously, and it's more open to that. And putting aside those two schemes you say that people are very upset about, I think there's a general view that transformation is the way forward. What I would say is that in terms of sustainability is more than just climate change. It's about economic sustainability as well.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind, Chester has one of the biggest clusters of visitor destinations outside London in the UK, and a significant retail sector, both of which are struggling significantly, with a great deal of jobs dependent on that. So that's as much sustainability as anything else.
Yeah.
What I would like to kind of inject here is about, and perhaps this is, when we get to the terms of reference, there's the usual thing of just dealing with what the components of transportation are, cycling, buses, and all the rest of it. There's really the kind of thinking about why we're doing this in Chester.
Yeah.
because Chester is an incredibly special place for a whole raft of reasons. And there's a real opportunity here to think about enhancing its viability and vitality via the things we do here, about creating a more livable place and a more livable places, and about the future of the vitality of the city centre, which is really critical. So I think it's just more than about, you know, the components of transport. It's how transport can deliver those things.
Yes, I agree, Andy, and I think it's that element, the sort of the first paragraph at the top of that page there, which is the opportunity that we have in front of us now for that transformational positivity, really, isn't it? So yeah, I endorse the comments and they're noted on it. Thank you. Christy, who else did we have? Sorry, just can't see the function at the moment.
Sorry, Chair. Sean, can I get the process right? Is Christy looking after the hands up? And,
yeah, she's monitoring the hands up. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Christy, do you have?
I think Christy's on mute, but I think it's Rob Pickering next.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Then me after that.
All right, thanks, Roy. Yes, Rob.
Thank you, Sean. First of all, thank you for the background. And I think you quite rightly point out some of the physical and practical changes that are needed within the transport sector. What I would also say is that, yes, we need to do that, but in order to do that, this has got to be accompanied by behavioural change.
Yeah.
This is absolutely about changing people's habits, and not only individual people's habits, because that's hugely important. So that's me picking up my bike or going or walking instead of picking up my keys to my car. But it's also about persuading businesses, organisations to change their strategies and policies where necessary in order to support the drive to address the climate change emergency. So absolutely behavioural change is what it's at for me. Yeah. And just one other small final point. I think we've got to be very careful to keep recognising that this is a borough-wide initiative and not just Chester.
Agreed.
I'm very happy that it's Chester because I'm a resident, but it's equally got to include all the other areas of Cheshire West and Chester.
Most definitely, yeah. Thank you. Cheers,
Thank you.
And then Roy Newton.
Thanks, Sean. A couple of things here. One, wholeheartedly endorse what Andy Farrell was saying. Transport's a means to an end, and therefore, from a left perspective, this is about how we build back better, how we get the economy of the borough and indeed the wider sub-region, back to pre-COVID levels and beyond, but do it in a sustainable way. And really, on a positive from that, is sort of to point out to people that Department for Transport has funding available for this that we can tap into. So there's £2 billion over a 5-year period available nationally for supporting walking and cycling, and a further £3 billion to support public transport. So again, the sorts of measures that this forum can come up with, we have mechanisms to point them towards the government for potential funding.
Yeah, that's a good point. Very good point, Roy, in terms of the future sums that are available for the sort of medium longer term strategies relative to the here and now funding that was sort of we were afforded with the tranche 1 monies, which was to a total of 161,000 across the borough. But the opportunity is a lot greater moving forward. I agree. Thank you. Christy, was there anybody else at this point?
Yes, there is. David Beer.
Yeah. Hello, David.
Hello, thank you. Yes, fully endorse and support the points that have just been made by previous people as well. But also, in terms of the perceived barriers to effecting change, transport focused research shows that basically there's 3 components. There's cost, convenience, and complexity. And those are the key things that need to be addressed. So you've got to make it affordable for people to be able to change. You've got to make it convenient so that when they're making a choice about which mode of travel, how to make their journey, there is a convenient alternative, and that's door to door as well. So that it's not just, oh, how do I get to the station or the bus station, or well, I haven't got a bicycle or whatever. You've got to make that convenient for them. And the third one is complexity, because far too often people find that those barriers in place, there's ticketing, there's how do the services work, where do I get information from, and a whole range of other issues. So cost, convenience and complexity are the key barriers to address.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah. Okay.
Sean, no particular hands up at the moment, but a few comments in the box, you know, backing up what David's just said, and also comments about bringing the people along with you and sort of campaigns on that kind of thing. Opportunities for Park and Ride with the Clockwise situation that will be unleashed soon. And a question about whether there's going to be any other appointments tonight, specialists, for example, but I think that sort of follows on, doesn't it? So
it does, yeah. No, that's, thanks, Christy. That's helpful. So Chair, if I move on to item 7, if that's okay with you, and this is a session or some time on the agenda to consider some of the submissions that have been made in a request for questions of the task force. So some submissions were made in writing. So I think we had over 35 in response to this agenda this evening. So all submissions were clearly somewhat time limited this evening. But we will devote some time to some of these now, sample of these now. All others will get a written response along with the ones that we're sampling here in due course. And just for task force members' awareness, really, that there is a set of sort of frequently asked questions that the council have published on its website as well, which is a useful background reading. So I'll go through briefly, Chair, and we've selected some that I think have got particular synergies with the task force members here today.
Before you start, Sean, I wonder, is there a kind of a central place where people know that they can get access to all the documentation and the questions and their responses? Will that be made available to everybody?
Yeah, there will be. There'll be a dedicated area, Chair. Yeah. So we'll publicise that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So the first one, and again, as I said, there's many questions here, but the first one was a common theme in terms of how are the levels of pollution on Bourton, so the A51, a stretch of road, which is already the second most polluted road in Chester, being monitored. How were they monitored before the introductions of the lanes, and how will they be monitored in affecting a decision regarding the future of the bus lanes? So I'll put that out to task force members for any queries there. Just a bit of background from myself to help. I think the question which came from a resident here who lives on this stretch has rightly advised that it's an existing air quality management area, the stretch of the A51 and then the inner ring road in Chester has already formally been allocated an air quality management area because of those high incidences. So that's been in place for a number of years. So we have an extensive monitoring regime in terms of sets of diffusion tubes that are out there permanently monitoring air quality. There's an air quality monitoring station at Bourton as well, and those results are sort of published on the website, but again, willing to make any of that information available in that sort of data centre, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you.
So any other sort of queries, questions in terms of that. Obviously, we will look to bring that data and make that available not only to the task force but to the public, and it will help inform that future decision making. And we'll look for the task force to consider that alongside us when we're monitoring and evaluating. So any questions on that, Christy? Anything?
Sean and Chair,
Yeah.
we've had a question in the chat from a member of the public, just saying, is this task force the council's response to the public's disquiet on the emergency active travel lane? So I know it's broader than that, but perhaps you want to address that.
Yeah, we'll go on to some of that. I think I've tried to in my background. It isn't that's not the sole remit in terms of response to the emergency active travel fund schemes, but we'll go on to that in the next item. So yeah, just to reassure that attendee, we will touch on that shortly. So if I move on to question 2, and I think this resonates with some of the points that Andy Farrell made earlier, and I'd welcome any further comments, and particularly Nicola as well, I think. But a respondent here saying we are destroying our beautiful city, causing unnecessary chaos and misery for everyone who lives here. No one will travel into the cities, it takes too long to get there. And when the shops are open again, no one will travel from outside the city because of the traffic chaos, resulting in our city becoming a ghost town. Our city is so beautiful, stop the madness now. So I'd invite comments from task force members in relation to that. I think my only introductory comment to help the conversation is that clearly that's certainly not the intent of the council, and why would it be? That's not an outcome that the council wants from the actions that it's taken. Respect the viewpoints of the resident there, but that's clearly not the intent. But yeah, welcome any further comments.
Chair, we have a couple of hands up. We've got Stephen Perry, Nicholas Sayed and Andy Farrell.
Yeah, Stephen.
Yeah, actually, it's not a comment or an answer, it's more of a question, Sean. Has any monitoring taken place since the introduction or the reintroduction of the bus lanes in terms of traffic queuing, traffic throughput times, etc.? Because I just wonder whether there's any data, not that can you share now, but is the data that can be shared to the task force, because I think that's pretty critical. I have spent time observing all of the bus lanes and have a personal view, but it's not a completely comprehensive view, but I would welcome something analytical.
Yeah, certainly by you, Chair. Again, it goes back to that sort of data collection. We have got comparable data collected before and post implementation, and pre-lockdown, pre-second lockdown as well to compare. So we'll make that data available. That ranges from obviously air quality analysis. We've done journey times through these corridors. We have done fully classified counts to determine buses, taxis, cycling, walking, turning counts. So yeah, all that wealth of data does exist, and we'll make that open to the public. Yeah, nothing to hide there. That's the transparent process.
Okay, thank you.
And then Nicola, please.
Just my view on this is it kind of underlines the importance of that engagement with the businesses and the who are in the city centre or across at Cheshire West and Chester, if it's in relation to other parts of the district. I think the feeling is a sense of these things were put in without that prior engagement, and I think that's all that people would ask to do, would be part of the decision-making process, have the chance to comment and shape, because there's absolutely a role for sustainable travel routes into our places. It's just got to go alongside whatever other routes we need to keep that traffic flow moving. And obviously as well, this isn't, I suppose, a question in response to just the sustainable measures, but also to the other initiatives in the city, such as Clockwise and so on, which aren't sustainable issues. So it's just making sure that that engagement is there with key stakeholders who will need to adapt as a result of what is happening, and have the opportunity to shape and influence the programmes. And hopefully this task force will provide a route for you to do that, because I've mentioned in the chat, we all represent different groups of businesses and stakeholders as a means for engagement. So, for example, in Chester, we have the Destination Chester cluster, which represents that cluster of attractions and hotels that Andy was talking about before. We think the biggest outside of London, and you know, we are a route for engagement with those businesses. So I'm hoping that my role on this group will provide that route to allow that input.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. And then I think we had Andy, didn't we?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, Andy.
Yeah. Yeah, and hence my comment earlier on, actually, about just ensuring in terms of reference, we do get in, you know, a real careful consideration of the special qualities of Chester, as a place to kind of live, trade, as well as work. Because as Roy said, you know, transport is not the end in its own. It's a means to an end, and it needs to enable things. What I would say is that, to a degree, putting aside the kind of the anger within the question, there's a real point in that. And I think, you know, that there are negatives of the schemes that are being put together. Largely, I feel about timing. You know, the one-way ring road because of the drain, and the works associated with that, and the bus lanes all coming together in the middle of a pandemic seems kind of unfortunate timing. So, you know, some of this will settle down, and some of it is short-lived. The drain. You know, hopefully quicker than other things. What I'm keen to understand, and perhaps the task force really needs to consider, is what the rest of the plan is. These are two transport initiatives. You know, the rest of the plan needs to think about, you know, how, you know, electric vehicles and servicing and buses and cycles and walking all plays together in terms of making Chester work as a sustainable place and as a sustainable economy, and the rest of the borough as well, of course. So I think people need to see what the plan is as a whole and interact with the plan as a whole, and see those two initiatives as part of that rather than an end in their own right.
Yeah,
I think that's a very good point, Andy. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So we have Stephen Hughes.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen.
Hi, just a couple of small points, essentially supplementary points to what Nicola and then Andy said. First of all, with Nicola mentioned about the consultation, I was part of a consultation that was held through Good for Nothing Chester. I guess it was quite a small group in terms of the 27, I think, people that were there, but there was a lot of time devoted to it. So although there was, you know, necessity for quick action, there was at least a small amount of consultation that went on there. Second point on Andy's is that exactly as he was saying, the consideration for Chester as a destination needs to be considered, and what the best way to do that is, with, I think, potentially a particular focus on the capacity of the road network that we currently have, and the amount of people that can travel along those avenues. As we know, in particular with the Bourton lanes at the moment, there simply isn't room for further expansion of that road. So finding ways that we can get more people more efficiently through those avenues is obviously a large consideration on how to make it a more desirable destination.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I'll move on.
Got a couple more hands. Sorry.
Oh, go on. Yeah,
we've got Dave Whitehead and Rob Pickering.
Yeah. Hello, Dave.
Hi there, Sean. I just want to support really what Nicola and Andy have said, but one of the things I'm seeing and reading in here is, I think a lot of the frustration is born out of transparency. So that bigger picture and that understanding of what we're trying to do as a whole. So I think what would be useful as part of this process is to make sure we are very transparent and make sure that we do communicate the criteria for success, which I know has been mentioned, and apologies if it's going to come later. And also making sure the data is available as well. So we're talking there about the data on the, the traffic in Bourton and the monitoring. But can we make sure that we try and make sure that the data is there, that we are very transparent, and that people can see what is happening and why things need to be done.
Yeah, I endorse that viewpoint. Yeah. And then, who did we have? Christy.
Rob Pickering.
Hello, Rob.
Yeah, thank you. Just briefly, I was particularly struck by a comment Andy Farrell made there about the importance of seeing the whole picture and the big picture. And I think that's really important, both from a borough-wide perspective, but also then perhaps broken down into some of the major areas like Chester and Winsford and so forth. And the reason why it's important to see the whole picture like that is that I think in order to achieve the objectives that you showed at the beginning of the meeting, we, that is the council and other stakeholders, will be required to make some very major decisions and possibly some very costly decisions. So if we don't see that big picture, it's going to make that decision-making process that much more difficult.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Sure. If I move on to questions 3 and 3A are linked really in terms of a theme, and it was a query about the makeup of the task force and how you're going to be sort of balanced and fair in decision making. I think we've touched on some of them clearly in terms of the membership early on and the wide nature of that, but then also the sort of 3A question that I've put in there. We've obviously got some parish along with us tonight, which is great to have them involved. There are clearly other substantive community groups that aren't forming part of the task force itself. But yeah, welcome, Chair, particularly your views about how we can make sure that, as the previous speakers have outlined, that the need for us to engage is paramount, obviously, isn't it, in this process?
Yes, absolutely, Sean. I mean, clearly we need to get in touch with the parish councils and say, you are welcome to come along and either send questions or attend. I think as this group grows in importance and reach, we will naturally attract these people, and it may be that we found other ways of communicating outside of this particular time.
Yeah, and I think we'll go on to some of that in terms of the terms of reference and future activities a little bit later. But clearly, yeah, it's great that the parishes and communities are interested in working with us there. And
we've got a question from Stephen Perry. He's got his hand up.
Yeah, hello, Stephen.
Sorry, Sean. Can I go back to A? I guess that probably everybody on this task force drives a car. And I'm very, very heartened to hear people like David, Nick and other people taking a wider perspective, which we must take. I feel that I, as an individual, am very willing to represent all forms of transport: bus, train, cycling, walking. But I do think we have to make sure that we are not seen to be excluding the drivers. I hope the drivers are represented by the body itself. And I can't actually think of an organisation that could be representing drivers, but I just think we must make sure that the motorists don't feel unrepresented.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That, Stephen. Thank you. I think just again we'll move on to clockwise, has been mentioned previously. So for those who don't know about the background, I'll just fill that in, Chair, for people. So this is a utility excavation, so a new drain that's been laid to facilitate significant redevelopment in Chester city centre, and to be able to enable to provide that drain and that substantive asset. There's the ring road that I mentioned before, as a decision has been taken to put a one-way system on that ordinarily two-way ring road. So there's a question here about a positive element that there's been sort of heavy press and communication surrounding the implementation of the Clockwise Chester scheme, and I think that sort of reflected on colleagues within the council that's probably been communicated for probably six to 9 months to some partners, and has been really visible in making people aware that this is happening. So we'll pass that reflection on to colleagues, because I think it's deserved of them. But the query for our agenda here is related. Is why was there no large press campaign or information released about this major road change being the A51? So I think, Chair, if you'll allow me, I'll sort of obviously that predates the involvement of the people on the task force, really, as to why that.
It does, and it might be interesting to know where the person who sent the question in lives, because I certainly remember kind of a brochure coming around about the Clockwise scheme. But
yeah.
So anyway, please do, Sean. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they're recognising the publication of the Clockwise schemes worked really well. But they're contrasting that with the Emergency Active Travel Fund. That's the basis of it. So I think that the difference, genuinely, the difference in that is that the Clockwise scheme has probably been at least 9-12 months in the making as part of the major Northgate development. The Emergency Active Travel Fund, the council were given 3 days to complete an application form to secure its allocation, which is far from ideal to devise and then sort of cost and submit the schemes within the 3 days, and then an instruction given that it had to, on announcement of the funding award subsequently, it had to deliver the schemes within 4 to 6 weeks. So I think that's the biggest distinction there to make. Clearly, time for engagement was available in one and not the other. And I think just reflecting on that and just some insight into tranche 2 of the Emergency Active Travel Fund, which is due to be released shortly, we believe, from the Department for Transport, is that the message from the department about the need to engage is significantly different with tranche 2, and I think there's a general acknowledgement from them of the lessons that needed to be learnt in terms of the pace that was expected for these schemes to be delivered. That will be wholly different, and we will see that one of the fundamentals, and I welcome the insight of the members here, is that the fundamental difference will be that they will want to they're insisting on seeing evidence of communication with communities before the actual money is released, and that's all authorities across the country, which I think is really welcome news. It's a different approach. That does explain the time pressure that we had upon us in that one. So I think it also, interestingly though, just for members of the task force and attendees to hear though, is that there's clearly a requirement in tranche 2 to evidence the communication. There's not an expectation within that that the sort of you only deliver the scheme if there's a majority in support, because what the departments are looking at is for us to try and engage the silent majority as well in that field. So you'll have to demonstrate in future collaboration, which we'd all support co-developments of the schemes. But I think there is an acceptance from the Department for Transport that you're unlikely to get a majority support when you're reallocating road space, and that shouldn't prevent the schemes being implemented, as long as you've listened to the communication coming back.
We have a question.
Yeah.
Hands up from Paul Morrison.
Yeah. Hi, Paul.
Hi there. Less of a question, really, just more kind of confirmation of what you've really said there, Sean. We've noticed a lot of schemes across England and including London with the EATF1 schemes that have gone in. It's really a knee-jerk reaction to COVID-19 and the necessity to get measures in for social distancing. That's why local authorities have done them quick, without any consultation. And the expectation was they were going to be temporary anyway. So, local authorities have tried to get them in fast, but without consultation, they're never but Sustrans at great length about EATF Tranche 2 and the need for consultation and meaningful engagement throughout that. You mentioned, that it has to be meaningful. So what you generally have on an engagement scale is you have about 25% that say no, 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 and wave their hands and very angry. You have 25% that are probably the, super cyclist lobbyists that are all into this and really want to know. But what we need to be interested in that 50% in the middle. This is the silent majority. These are the people that are either disengaged or hard to reach or whatever, A DFT will want to see evidence that we're actually tackling that. That doesn't mean we don't listen to that 25% on the other side. We listen to everything and everybody needs to be engaged. But purposeful and meaningful engagement means looking really thoughtfully how your community is made up, making sure you get hard to reach groups, those that are traditionally really difficult to target. That might be the elderly, it might be ethnic minority groups, those sorts of things. So yeah, I just wanted to agree with you that although mistakes might have been made in Tranche 1, you're not alone in this as an authority.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Yeah, that's I appreciate the narrative there as well. I think, Chair, if I may, I think I think question 5 we've
time, don't we?
Question 5 we've touched on. This is about some of the design locations and some of those monitoring and how we're going to inform the final decision. So we touched on that as data led, and we've got some frequently asked questions that answer that. I think quickly, Chair, I can. We've got a couple of questions related to funding. I think this is probably important just to touch on question 6.
That's important, yeah. Sure.
Yeah. So a community member asked, well, would we consider allocating a permanent percentage, say 5% if it's road building and maintenance budget for active travel? So it's probably one for me to answer that quite readily. Is we have done that certainly in this financial year in my tenure with the authorities, is that there are indicative allocations that Department for Transport give us within the integrated transport block, the funding block, and there is a indicative percentage that we should give to active travel, and we've more than give that allocation this financial year. I think the second question, question 7, was about the funds used to finance the cycle lanes, bus lanes, and what the budget is. That is the Emergency Active Travel Fund, and the breakdown of the details of that expenditure is now on the frequently asked questions, so that one's covered. And then the final one, if I may, Chair, is relating to really the design issues relating to the active travel lane. So we've talked a lot about the principle, haven't we, of the need for these, and then this question gets into the detail of sort of geometric design and elements of that. So again, we've got lots of expertise on the panel here which can guide that moving forward. I think the biggest change that happened, and I'm sure sort of our cycling colleagues on the task force here will testify that there is now LTN, Local Transport Note 120, that was issued after Tranche 1, is a comprehensive design guide for cycling infrastructure now, and most welcome. So I think that is the design standard moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Chair. So if I move on to governance matters, if that's okay, Chair. So yeah, what of
checking? No further questions on those. No, that's fine. Yeah. Sorry, please.
No, that's okay, Chair. So what I've done here, Chair, is that, and this is more of the dry subject matter for attendees who are watching and listening in, but it's really important that we get this right, and we reach agreement on the terms of reference at the start. I'm sure you agree, Chair.
Yes, completely agree.
So all I've done here is replicated at the moment for us to talk through. I'll use the terms of reference as the agenda here. So I think the background we've talked about, and we've had general agreement to the background. And just to answer, go back. I did say I would answer a specific question before. What so what instigated the task force? Yes, initially the objections that we faced to the Emergency Active Travel Fund, but really that was a bit of a bit of a stark awakening. There is that the agenda is much wider than that. We set the challenge before about the climate emergency and Andy's points about supporting economic development and businesses and regeneration. We need to do something, so we can't do what we've just been doing into the future because it's not sustainable on a number of fronts. So that's the background. I think we generally got consensus to that, Chair, but welcome any comments. And then in terms of remits, we are looking for the task force to make recommendations to the councils, and it's really important. I think this paragraph, if we can invite comments from the task force on this, is that so we're looking on ways to create high quality places and communities that support town centre economies together with general health and wellbeing through improved delivery of ambitious walking, cycling, public transport and integrated transport projects across the borough. So I think, as second the point that Roy Newton made earlier, it's not transport as a means to an end, it's transport to do all those really positive things there. So I'll just pause there on remit, Chair, if
we've got a question from Dave Whitehead.
Yeah, hello Dave.
Hi there. It's probably just a minor point, but just want to make sure that I know that looking at the this, it looks very forward looking, which is good, but can I just check if the task force has the remit to look at existing projects? And making sure they're in place. It's just not very clear on this at the moment that we're looking at, current initiatives that are in place.
Yeah. Through you, Chair, I'll come on to that point. It is in there, Dave.
Great.
David, so
okay.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think the remit was the consensus, Chair, that we've all the task force have talked about earlier. I think outlined for the group. Again, this was a draft, so it can be influenced by the members here. This is your terms of reference, really. So we were looking at 4 weekly frequency at this point, which would be obviously virtual sessions. So I don't know whether any of the membership has got comments on that.
We've got 2 hands up.
Yeah.
We've got Andy Farrell and Stephen Perry.
Yeah. Hello, Andy.
Hi there. Just if I may, is it okay just to go back to the remit for a second? You moved off before I got my hand up.
No, sorry, Andy.
Don't worry. I'm just wondering, is it worth adding where you talk about high quality places and communities that support town centre economies, whether we can actually say high quality, vibrant and livable places?
Yeah.
Because that gets, a broader thing, because high quality places doesn't actually mean very much. We all think we know what it means, but vibrant and livable brings those sorts of quality of place into that, and the economic vibrancy into that. So that'll be useful as far as the bid's concerned.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Chair, is there any thoughts on that inclusion?
No, I think that's fine. I think it's a very sensible suggestion, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then we had
Stephen Perry.
Stephen. Hello, Stephen.
Thanks, Sean. I'm not sure whether this comes best under point 4 outline for the group or later on under engagement, but I'm just mindful that the format of this meeting, which clearly benefits from being wide in its attendance and also inclusive of public, is not going to be a sort of doing environment. And the question I have in general is that, well, sorry, let me start with the statement again. I think there's a lot to get on with now, and I guess there'll be a lot to get on with in the future. I think a 4 weekly frequency of this forum is probably the best we can manage. But is there an expectation there will be subgroups, or whatever you might call them, doing things in between, looking at data, working as groups? Because I think that that's the only way we'll end up delivering. Yeah. Just leave that thought with you, but I think it should be addressed somehow when we talk about the terms of reference. Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, I think that's fine, Stephen. That's a really good idea, and it's something that I've actually made a note to talk about in the closing remarks. I think it's something we will need to do, and we will need to look at individual kind of tasks as how we go about doing that. There are so many themes, but how can I put it? So much potential to make sure that we get this right. And as I say, it is a national leader on this, so let's do this job properly. So I agree with that completely.
Thanks, Chair. So again, we touched on the frequency. We'll come back to that, because I'd endorse that viewpoint as well. So we're talking about meeting structures around themes with evidence provided from officers, partner organisation experts to support your discussion. We'll generate that data centre as well for ourselves and the public to look at that data transparently. So we'll support the sort of administration and chair support you with the organisation. We'll take councillor
thank you.
Point on about the format of the meetings as well.
Thank you.
We will invite. This was the proposal. We'll invite stakeholder representatives to provide their views and expertise, and this point about the engagement that we all support. The task force will also hold a call for evidence, in which wider representatives will be invited to submit their evidence, and that is for both for and against the current proposed implementation of sustainable transport projects. So yeah, if welcome any thoughts on that, even if endorsements of that.
Stephen.
You mentioned. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. So you mentioned about the engagement and about the comms when you were making reference to tranche 2, and how the DFT were looking for evidence of that communication and that engagement for the. Do they themselves outline a budget for that, or is it just expected that the already stretched capacity of the council will be able to carry that out? Because I think that has been one of the kind of underlying factors that has caused so many issues, is that an already stretched council doesn't have the capacity to potentially deliver things in the right way. So I don't know if we know what the budget's looking like already or not, and whether there'll be funding made available for both the comms and the engagement things there.
Chair, I can probably answer that. Really valid point, Stephen. In the briefing that we received from the department recently on tranche 2, that challenge was made by a number of authorities as well, and what the departments have indicated, that there's flexibility between what is normally quite a hard revenue and capital split. There is flexibility because they realise the importance of it, and you have to spend money to do it. So yes, you can. Yeah. Okay.
So just a supplementary point to that, is that funding able to be outsourced? Are you able to hire, various separate organisations that to carry out this work, or does it have to be internal?
I think just subject to the council's constitution, Stephen, and finance procedure rules. Really, that'll be the governing, because we'll receive the grants for any tranche 2. But yeah, it's just subject to those usual rules. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Chair. So then we were looking at, after that, the sort of call for evidence, and we'll make those sessions really engaging. The task force is looking to seek a consensus response to these issues and make a recommendation on the way forward. So hearing the message from the task force members this evening, I'm sure that's the ambition themselves, to make a real difference here, and the council, speaking on behalf of the council here myself, we would welcome that. I'll go on to membership. I don't dwell on that because we've touched on that earlier on the agenda. What I have acknowledged here is the task force members, Chair, including yourself, have got lots of competing sorts of challenges here and resource challenges. So what we are expecting a time commitment from its members, and we'll touch on some of the detail of that depending on how, in your closing remarks, how you want to move forward. But we will accept clearly sort of substitute attendance. We've got a few tonight, and we welcome those from Vanessa and John as well. So that's for me, that's to be supported.
Sure, that's flexibility. Thank you.
So then,
hands up, Sean. Sorry.
Yeah.
Stephen Perry and Dave Whitehead.
Yeah.
Sorry, me again, Sean. Again, I think we have a comprehensive list of task force members, and probably to go big is going to be making it more complex. But I want to emphasise the point that a couple of people have made already about, and yourself have made about it being a borough-wide.
Yeah.
I think there are certain people on the list who clearly cover the borough, and I think we should encourage them, as I'm sure they will do, to act on behalf of the borough. But I think other people, myself included, I think we've got to actually work hard to be inclusive, to go out to Ellesmere Port, to go to Winsford, to go to Frodsham, and maybe, as appropriate and when appropriate, to specifically invite people from further afield, because there is a risk. And if you read some of the comments in the meeting chat, there's also suggesting we're a bit Cestrian censored, and I think again we have to be careful not to do so, not to be so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chair, can I just a comment on that? Just a bit of that is a bit of query that's been raised, Stephen. I think you're right. We would urge task force members to look at a borough-wide through a borough-wide lens. I think that there clearly is contention with two Chester schemes at the moment, and to a degree we don't apologise for having some focus on it initially, but the membership isn't fixed, Chair. It's subject to yourself and fellow members agreeing moving forward. You're able to invite other parties on and to engage with you as and when you see fit.
Okay, thank you. That's useful to know.
David, was it? I think as well.
Hi there. Yeah, I appreciate. Yeah, you've got those the two projects on there as being the first ones to look at. I'm just slightly concerned, obviously, with the full weekly timescale, that given the impact and the sort of feedback we're getting on those two projects, is there any way to accelerate this in any way, shape, or form? To think about possible subgroups, to think about bringing in the experts on these, as obviously there's a lot of focus on it. There's a huge impact to the the community and the businesses. I think if we walk away and leave this as we're not going to discuss it until another 4 weeks' time, I don't think that that's going to look great. It's not going to hold well, and it's not actually going to fulfill what we're trying to do from an environmental and business perspective.
So if I can jump in there, yes, you're absolutely right. We covered this point a little earlier about the desire to set up task groups. Clearly, we need to give some thought to that so that they can be efficient and useful and serve the purpose, because it is possible also for task groups to just drag as well and pull the thing back. So I understand your concern about the timescales, and I share them. But at the same time, we really do need to make sure that we've got the shape right of exactly what areas we need to look at. And I'll probably welcome the feedback from everybody here on what they consider to be areas that we should kind of break this down into. I was going to mention this at the end, but thank you for that comment.
Chair, as well, and as you said, we'll discuss the potential themes and potential groupings and subgroups. I'm sure towards the end. I think, David, the offer that I can also make to you, I know I've met some of the groups separately in my role within the authority. So I recently met some representatives of Upton who've clearly got similar concerns in the Liverpool Road area. That stands for any sort of community groups and bodies that, don't wait for the 4 weekly cycle if you want some data and talk through some issues with us. My offer's open to engage with it on a regular basis on that side of things, if that helps.
Okay, thank you.
Another hands up from Stephen Perry. Sorry.
Yeah. Go on, Stephen.
Sorry, that must be a mistake. Apologies.
Okay.
That's okay. Yeah. So we touched on engagement, Chair, earlier, and again in the first meeting today, it was always a balance between doing some of this really important governance work and then allowing some of the public questions to be raised. But yeah, certainly moving forward, and we've got some real expertise on the task force, haven't we? That are in terms of that meaningful engagement. So I'm sure as a potential theme we've got on there as well, community engagement. I'm sure we'll do our best moving forwards with that.
Okay, thank you.
So it probably comes to on potential themes, Chair. Is that maybe where you were looking to bring in your sort of closing remarks in terms of the way forward for the task force moving ahead? Is that I think there were some comments made to me and colleagues internally about the size of the task force and being a concern. It's probably larger than most task forces, but I think given the range of potential themes, I think it also gives an opportunity to be able to populate some subgroups. But so yeah, I welcome your thoughts there, Chair.
Thank you. I think it is a large group, but I think you're right. I think if we do manage to form some groups here, I think prioritising it obviously though is going to be a key here, because we can't do everything all at once, and we have to kind of manage the way in which we approach these. So one of the things we will need to do is to decide, climate change is obviously going to overarch everything that we're doing. So what particular way do we look at that as a subgroup? Whereas other things, traffic congestion and traffic volumes, is something we can perhaps be a little more tangible about. So I think we do need to do a little bit of work on this and decide the best way to work these groups. But I think the themes here are certainly a good start. But as I said earlier, I'd welcome other ideas. We seem to have a lot of hands popped up after all that. So I think we got Nicola.
It was just a practical question, really. I'm just a bit concerned, like this format of the meeting. There's quite a lot of comments in the chat that don't seem to show up on the screen. So I just want to make sure that we're somehow capturing all the comments and responding to them just from a transparency point of view. Otherwise it could feel quite frustrating, I imagine, for some people that their views are not being able to be put forward.
Right. We will pick up a method of doing this and making sure that they get picked up. They'll certainly get picked up at the end if we haven't actually addressed them in some kind of response during the meeting. So thanks, Nicola. Andy?
Yeah, but very quickly, and it's the themes really, and it reflects some of the thinking that's gone on before this, by this being a bit Chester focused, or could appear a bit Chester focused. One could have a think about some of the themes being place orientated. So you have a Chester theme, you have a Winsford theme, because whenever you come up with Winsford, it's going to be different than Chester, for example, etc., etc. And if you get the Chester theme early on, perhaps we can have a go at those two sticky issues that are coming up as urgent items for this task force to consider.
Absolutely, Andy. I mean, obviously that was the kind of kick-off point, wasn't it, for this particular task force, and we need to kind of be seen to be addressing those first. But no, I'll address the geography in my closing remarks, if I may, Andy. Rob?
Thank you, Chair. It was just a point about, Stephen mentioned at the start of the meeting about the active travel forum that exists in Chester. And I'd just be interested to be clear how this task force interacts with the active travel forum, and indeed any other active travel fora or the like across the borough, because joining up those agendas and activities would be important.
Yes, thank you for that. I'll look into that, Rob. Hand's still up, or is it another question? Oh, it's down now. Okay, thank you. Sean, have you finished on that particular topic?
Chair, I think just a couple of points on. Was it Rob there who came in with the query about the active travel forum? We were particularly mindful of that, Rob, as well, is that there's been a lot of good work, I'm sure Stephen has contributed to and will testify by the Active Travel Forum. What we were certainly not wanting to do in any way was to sort of replicate a lot of the efforts. So I think, Chair, you can use that as a resource, a really useful resource for you,
Thank you very much.
as well, without replicating that. And I think, Chair, just to raise one matter with you again in a similar vein, and I think Councillor Paul Roberts may be an attendee of the session, but it certainly asked me to raise a thought, is that Councillor Paul Roberts is a chair of a bus task force that's live at the moment, and I know David Beers has contributed really positively to one of the evidence sessions, David. So thank you. I have the opportunity for that. So again, I think we just need to link a conversation up with you, Chair, with Councillor Paul Roberts as well.
Yes, I'd welcome that. Thank you. Nicola, you've got your hand up here.
Just a point on the themes. I would be also interested to see the theme of sort of visitor or leisure pulled out a little bit more, not just necessarily as part of economic growth or health and well-being, but if you think about encouraging people to come to our places and cycling round or walking round, you know, the difference between the temporary measures and the more permanent measures are, you know, really important factors in that, and how we use those more permanent sustainable travel routes as part of our visitor and leisure offering. So I'd be really interested in being part of groups to discuss that in more detail, because I think if you're a family coming to Chester and you wanted to cycle around, you might be more inclined to use the kind of Millennium Greenway than the temporary cycle routes. So it'd be really good to get that as part of the discussion too.
Yeah, that's useful, Nicola. Thank you very much indeed. Stephen. Yep, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks again. Sorry, I just want to be absolutely clear. It's been implicit in what we've said so far, but I'd like to make it more explicit. That if we look at the themes, that's a set of themes which could represent almost a checklist against any focus of our initial discussions or ongoing discussions, or they could be separate groups that look at certain things. But I think we have to respect, especially if anybody's reading the meeting chat, there's a lot of frustration out there. And I think I'd just like to encourage us to do whatever we can in the next 4 weeks to work hard at addressing the two bus lane issues that are causing most concern. And clearly, you know, that in itself, you could consider that a theme against which we test all the other aspects of the theme. But I just didn't want to leave the meeting without saying, well, what are we actually going to do? It may not be possible to decide that fully now, but I just think there's a feeling for action. And I think, you know, speaking on behalf of many people I know in the active travel forums, a lot of people willing to go and help, physically help, measure, check, count, whatever, not just sort of review other data. So I want to push the action if I can to address some of the genuine concerns which I'm reading. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. I mean, a point I made a few moments ago was that obviously that was the, if you like, the sore point that kicked off the creation of the task force, and we do have to be seen to be addressing that. But then again, an earlier comment was made about the fact that it must be part of a larger plan, so that, you know, where are we going over a kind of a 3-5 year basis, and how does this form part of that? So we've got a tension here. We've got a tension between trying to sort this out now and, you know, satisfy people's ire, but at the same time we have to kind of make sure that it does fit into a presentable argument. So I'll be following that up with the necessary people to. I don't know, Sean, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, Steve, I think just to. And the attendees that are listening, clearly that was the reason that it was set up in the first place, and I think you can see from the remit that timescales that we're asking the task force to consider a work programme that investigates those two schemes, so that there's certainly that's front and central, but clearly for all the reasons we've outlined. There is clearly a bigger picture as well, because not doing anything isn't an option in this area, is it? That's the thing. So I think even from an authority's perspective, if the investigation on those Tranche 1 schemes determines that they've not been successful, and we transparently evidence that, then the council will get behind that decision and will adapt, remove those facilities. But there must be a plan B for the reasons that we've outlined earlier, mustn't there? So, so yeah, that's just the point I'd want to stress. It's we've got to constructively find a solution to that objection for sort of it's making headway with the agenda for me is really crucial, Chair.
Okay, that's very useful indeed. Thank you. John Salt, yep. John?
Yes, Chair. I'm very much encouraged by what I'm hearing, but I have been reading the forum as well, and I pick up on one comment by GH about this being initiating, looking like a future talking shop. And for that reason, I think we really need to look at what success looks like against each of those themes and have some way of actually performance managing that so we can quickly see when we're hitting those success factors. And I'd like to see your expertise in that bringing back to the table, really. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, yes, we mentioned this kind of what does success look like earlier on as an overarching question for our particular group, but I think you're right that each of these, if we do decide to create a task group, it must itself have a reason for its existence. So thank you, John. John, anything on that?
No, that's fine, Chair. Thank you.
Okay.
I'd welcome the comment, John. Thank you.
Yeah, Stephen Hughes. Yeah.
Hi there. I was going to make another point, but just on John Salt's there, taking in the climate emergency response against each one of the criteria, there's specific KPIs. So I think one of the key objectives of any breakdown would be to develop KPIs, which I guess is the same point said differently slightly. But yeah, if you could have 2 or 3 of them, I guess that's a really key one. And just looking at the potential themes, I think from going back to David Beer's point almost at the start of the meeting, referencing the 3 biggest issues is cost, convenience and complexity. I know resources is mentioned in policies, processes and resources, but I think that the actual resource to encourage and to make active travel more convenient needs really to be its own solid section within one of these themes, because it kind of links to community engagement and behavioural change, but that resource outside of the on the ground infrastructure is as fundamental as any of these other considerations, I think.
It is. Yeah, Sean, I don't know if you want to add anything on that.
Yeah, no, again, it's a valid point, Steve. Just endorse that comment. I think again, just going back on was it John's point about we need to be clear what success looks like. Totally agree, and I think for those some of those individual schemes as well, there is an appraisal for active travel schemes that the Department for Transport have released recently. So it can be appraised against the various factors of air quality, health, safety, journey times, cycling increase, walking increase. So again, we can furnish that sort of evaluation tool, evaluation tool. Sure, we'll make that visible. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Stephen Perry, you still got your hand up, or is that a leftover?
Sorry, a leftover. Apologies.
Okay, no problem. So briefly, Mike, were you going to ask a question, or have you?
May I, just to pick up on what Sean and John were talking about there, borough-wide air quality data, is that a way of making sure that the whole borough does feel engaged?
Sorry, the whole borough is engaged? Sorry, to what aspect?
There was concern there, wasn't there, that only that we were being too Chester-centric.
Yeah.
But actually, Sean began the meeting really by pointing out that Chester was, I think, second worst, that the worst air quality conditions are around Ellesmere Port.
Yeah.
So we've got to give it the way of giving it a borough-wide context may be to look at air quality across the borough. So my question is that data available?
Yeah, we've certainly got data for air quality that's modelled. We've obviously got measuring instruments, Mike, in certain areas, but in terms of model data across further stretches of the borough, we have, and we introduced some additional ones to monitor the Liverpool Road scheme in Upton as well. So yeah, we are placing more equipment out there.
And that may be a way of showing that we're following priorities, that there is a kind of way of articulating the challenge across the borough that way. Obviously.
Noted, thanks, Mike.
Yeah, cheers. John Salts, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of a linked question on performance management as well. But air quality, Sean, just to help you out on here, you will be aware of Christleton's involvement, Christleton Parish Council, who've been very, very active in purchasing air quality monitors, and we've Great Borden have followed their lead, and we're looking at how we can, in effect, pin a monitor onto a school child so we can see what PM particles they are absorbing. But when you talk about a quick way of engaging with other areas, using the parishes to as your workhorse for gathering data, would be very effective. And then when you take that data, air quality is one of the very easiest measures to performance manage, because you can actually digitalize that data, and therefore you can look at improvement against weather and whatever. So when you actually do that, if you can engage with the council, with the parish councils, there are 2 parish councils. I know Upton want to be involved, but there are lots of troops out there for your task groups. Just have a think through that and come back. I think it's John Beckett who's the lead on that, and he's done some exceptional work.
Yeah, we've just in response to that, we work very closely with John, Crystal Littleton, and Roger as well from TAR in terms of TARing considerations. Yeah, we're working with them with that monitoring. We've assisted by additional monitoring equipment, for example, on the A51. We've invested in some mobile resource there that we're happy to discuss with the parish councils to see if we can move that around areas to help that monitoring. So thank you very much for the offer. We'll certainly take that up. And again, I said before, we're more than happy. Some of the task force members here will hopefully testify. My door's wide open to those discussions, and we'll use your resource to a joint effect. Yeah.
Thanks, Sean. I don't know if Tamara's still on the call, Tamara Hunt, but I know that the university has been looking into quality, using some of the people in the science and engineering. I don't know if there's anything kind of brewing in that area at all, Tammy.
I've just made a note of that to flag it up with colleagues in the engineering department to see whether it's something that could potentially be working with students across the borough potentially. I'd certainly have those conversations.
Because the students are always a good resource in this kind of thing. It makes ideal material for projects and studies like that. So they're very keen to do this kind of work. And I know some work has been done there. So I think that, Tammy, if you can perhaps bring something to a future meeting, that would be useful.
So, Chair, if that's the comments, a little bit mindful of time. So I think really it's any other business which you consider urgent, or you ask task force members, and then your closing remarks, please.
Okay, sure. Well, I think any other business which is urgent, I think, is all of the above, isn't it? Really,
it is.
But I would welcome questions and closing remarks from comments from colleagues if you feel you've got something new and different to add to what's already been said. We've obviously taken a note and we've recorded everything that has been said up till now. So if colleagues have got anything additional they'd like to say, I'd be happy to see your hands raised. David.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think one of the key things, particularly looking at the call for evidence, is to ensure that people's priorities for improvement are front and centre. We've got research that we do with the travelling public, and I think it's absolutely key to ensure that those priorities are taken notice of, particularly things like making sure that the reach of the network is there, it's viable, and it's we understand the journeys make so that the sustainable transport network is actually delivering on the kind of front that they want in terms of the journeys they want to make to be able to lead the lives that they do.
Okay, thanks, David. I think that seems to be it, Sean.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to the last item?
Yeah, it's yourself, Chair. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you everybody for your time this evening. I've been trying to make notes. It's got along, but to be honest, every single minute of this has been so interesting that it's been difficult for me to kind of pull a coherent final remarks together. But some of the points I've got down here is that one of the Chester's unique. That stands out, doesn't it? And Chester has to be protected. It has to be protected for its economy, and it has to be protected for the beauty, which was also brought out in comments, and its uniqueness. But at the same time, we have to change. We have to make a difference. We have to move forward. There are targets we have to meet, and there are things that we need to do. So this group has really got to learn how to balance this and make it work. So rather than cling, if you like, to one particular set of values that you've always thought, you've got to kind of look at the whole thing and how we can actually move forward on these fronts while retaining and protecting the former. So this is going to be an interesting part of our work. It does have a very broad remit, and I think that the task groups are going to be an important part of that. But once again, I go back to my earlier comments of how do we do that? How do we get the priorities right? Who goes onto those task groups, and how do we ensure that we get the right kind of information from that particular group? So that's going to need to be done fairly quickly, as well as I can see it. We don't have that much time. It would be nice when we emerge from this strange world that we're in at the moment if we have made a difference, if we have learned by some of the things we've seen when the increase in cycle usage, for instance, and increase in walking around the city when it's been quieter. It was interesting that as soon as kind of we had that interim period where the lockdown, where the lockdown was lifted a little bit, it didn't take long for the traffic to come back. So, is there something we can learn there? I think I mentioned borough-wide. That's a very important point. I have a particular interest in Ellesmere Port. I think I work with a number of different kind of areas there, and I think that's a very kind of an interesting area because it's industry, but also the energy and the way that that's going to change with renewable energy coming in as a major focus in that particular area. And then we have a corridor going along underneath the Mersey with Helsby and Frodsham. Great tourist areas to be exploited as far as walking, outdoor cycling and things like that are concerned. So we've got work we can do with the people out there. So and my final one really is about the membership. No, the membership is not fixed. I'd be very interested to hear about suggestions of how we can bring on that would really help us drive forward these agenda items that we've discussed. I will discuss with Sean and Christy afterwards about the best way of communicating with us directly, and I'm sure that will come out in the communications that follow this meeting. But I'm very, very passionate about this particular group, so I think you'll find me quite energetic in this area. So I will always welcome and listen to comments. So thank you for your time. Sean, anything else for us to do this evening?
Just to endorse that, thank you, Chair, for yourself for chairing this session. I think we're just on time now, and for colleagues here for devoting their time, and for the people listening and engaging with us on the line. The work really now starts. Does now. I think it was important that we had that governance conversation. I'll meet with you, Chair, after this session in the coming days to agree a sort of work plan, and we'll share that with members and publicise that. Again, the recording of this session will be publicised in the coming days, and we'll be able to take the notes in detail from it for you, Chair. But yeah, a massive thank you from me for everyone. Really appreciate your help. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Cheers. Goodbye.